διαμόρφη. Καλημέρα σας. Θα μιλήσω στα αγγλικά πάλι σήμερα. Λοιπόν, welcome back to our symposium on Balkan and Aegean artistic identities. A great symposium yesterday, all afternoon and evening. I enjoyed it very much. Fascinating new material was revealed to us from the 18th century, but also earlier centuries. And I hope that we can continue with this sort of additional revelation of new images, places, houses, objects. I'm looking very much forward. We have, in this session, which is the third session, we have on post-Byzantine sculpture and textiles and, in general, material culture. We're going to have 3 papers. And after that, we're going to have a discussion at the end with questions. And then coffee, okay? Important. Our first speaker is Anna Ballian from the Benaki Museum, Athens. She holds a PhD from the University of Birmingham of the Center of Byzantine, Ottoman, and Modern Greek Studies, and an MA on Islamic Art and Architecture from the University of London. In 1990, she became curator of the collection of post-Byzantine silver and religious embroideries at the Benaki, and from 2004 to 14, she became the senior curator of the Museum of Islamic Art of the Benaki Museum. She has published on subjects ranging from Byzantine to Islamic to Post-Byzantine, Armenian, Ottonian, and in culture in sort of a broader sense of this world. Her latest work focuses on immured Iznik plates and dishes that have been applied on ceramics in general, that were applied in Greek churches of the 16th and 17th century, and a most interesting, what I thought, more focused paper on a lady by the name of the Spinetta, yes, who was a Phanariot lady who was embroidering, an embroideress. And so we have some of her textiles, I imagine, yes, from the late 17th century. She has also several articles in press, one on the Church of Panagia on Horus Lukas, and the sort of bordering Saracens, and another one in the art and material culture in Ottoman Greece, between history and tradition. So today, her talk will be from the art of the empire to art of in the empire, the case of Ottoman and post-Byzantine art. Welcome, Anna Ballian.
Ναι, και εγώ έχω μια πιο μεγάλη, πιο δυνατή φωνή ίσως. Μ' ακούγομαι καλά? Ναι. Να δω τώρα τι γυαλιά χρειάζονται για εδώ, γιατί κοντινά, μακρινά, δεν ξέρω. So, good morning, everybody. That was a difficult day with the strike. The traffic was terrible, I must say. So, what you are seeing on the screen is one of the few mosques that I know, which is a Baroque mosque. That's why I'm with a Baroque decoration, not the Baroque mosque. It's a Baroque decoration. But I'm not talking about the Chandilvan Jami, although I wanted to. But so it's just a background. We'll have I'll talk a bit as an introduction, and then I'll show a few slides. So from art of the empire to art in the empire, the case of Ottoman and post-Byzantine art. Ottoman, the word Ottoman, is a term that sounds rather odd in Greek, and is basically a direct translation from English or French. It probably comes from English language historiography, which has promoted its use. In the last 20 years, the terms used by Greek scholars are descriptive. Greece in the Ottoman period, or Greece under Ottoman rule. There is also Serbia under Ottoman rule, or Bulgaria under Ottoman rule. Whereas 40 years ago, we would say Greece in the period of Turkish rule, or Greece in the Turkokratia period. Turkokratia means Turkish ruled Greece, Turkokratoumeni Elas, as the historian Konstantinos Sathas first wrote in 1869. The term Turkokratia, Turkish rule, is associated with the concept of Turkish yoke and oppression by a foreign power. Turkish rule Hellenism is understood as subject to the Turks, who belong to another race and another religion, and come to be identified with Muslims. Turkokratia is considered to have impoverished the Christian populations, blocked the route to their national and political independence, and cut them off from the West and the Renaissance. And this last was very important for Greeks. These views do not conform to more recent historical research, with the result that the term has been marginalized and is on the way to disappearing from our vocabulary, at least in the academia. The term Turkokratia is connected to the complementary paradigm in Greek history of Venetian rule, or Venetokratia, a term that originally has no negative implication, but nonetheless is gradually being displaced by the terms late medieval era or early modern era, also of English language derivation. It is a fact, however, that even today the term Ottoman can be ambiguous. It is used in different ways in different periods, and in different ways by scholars with different ethnic and academic backgrounds. I don't know, Serbians, Americans, Armenians, Bulgarians, Romanians, whatever. Many nationalities. In the 19th and most of the 20th century in Greece, the word Ottoman meant Muslim, which according to the Greek understanding was usually identical to Turk. In Republican Kemalist Turkey, it was a term to be disposed of as a new Turkish national genealogy had to be constructed and distanced from the imperial multi-ethnic past. Ottoman history and culture is a concept by now widely accepted in Greek and Balkan historiography. In Greece, there have been university courses since the 1980s, Department of Ottoman Studies, mostly history and language, and Greek Ottomanists are producing exceptional work. Recent Greek historiography places the study of the Greek Orthodox population within the wider Ottoman framework in which, after all, they belonged. What has happened, though, in the domain of art? Is there a similar phenomenon, a similar development? I would say yes, but with some reservation. Things are far more complicated and move more slowly. They differ from one medium to another. What applies in painting is not necessarily the case with silverwork or wood carving on architecture. What applies in secular art does not apply in religious art. Moreover, entangled with ethnic causes, the study of art has decidedly focused on art that could illustrate the fate of the Greek nation, rarely taking into consideration what applies in the domains of other Ottoman communities, be they Muslim or Christian, and their art, such as Armenian, Bulgarian, or Serbian art, and for that matter also Ottoman art. In a more general way, we would say that the study of art in Ottoman Greece should be reconsidered and adjusted to follow the trends of other related disciplines of the humanities, such as history and anthropology. Several steps have already been taken for a more cutting-edge approach, such as the abandonment of the old Orientalistic views about Turks, who were barbarian nomads according to the Orientalist views, and a further step that we should take is the rejection of the interpretative paradigm of influence, a passive position that does not explain reasons and methods, but downgrades and obscures the relationship between the influencer and the influenced. Instead, passive reception is stressed, which covertly operates in favor of the conservation of an ideal integrity, in our case the concept of national uniqueness. A good example here is the so-called Islamic influences, an ahistorical, timeless expression used typically just to replace the now obsolete term Oriental, but also in many instances meaning Ottoman. The two were thus equated, betraying an embarrassment or simply conveying an unknown and unexplored area of research. The terms used today in cultural anthropology are adoption or appropriation, which in their positive connotation mean to make one's own something that is not one's own. The major problem, however, that one confronts when dealing with the art of this period is its division in secular and religion art. Apart from material culture, which belongs to the secular sphere, there is also a rich store of ecclesiastical art, mainly religious architecture and painting, which is usually called Post-Byzantine. This is a rather abused term, which has been under attack during the last decades, and perhaps rightly so. Regardless of this, it has been often used and is still useful as a chronological reference, without qualification or nuance, the idea of Byzantium as an exclusively Greek empire. I read something different. Regardless of this, it has been often used and is still used as a chronological reference. But nonetheless, is it devoid of meaning? On the one hand, it promotes, without qualification or nuance, the idea of Byzantium as an exclusively Greek empire, and on the other hand, it hides the awkwardness of accepting that in the period of foreign rule and persecutions, the Greek people, the Greek Christians, did nonetheless create a distinctive art. Historians assert that the term Post-Byzantine is no longer accepted in academia. For example, in only rare cases do we speak about an imaginary fictional Post-Byzantine period. But apparently there is a general agreement about defining religious painting as Post-Byzantine. What then is the future and fate of the term Post-Byzantine in art? Is it persistent or is it fading away? Differentiations according to the individual artistic branches show perhaps the direction the use of the term is gradually taking. For example, religious architecture, namely churches, have been studied and researched since the inception of the Greek state. However, today, the term Post-Byzantine is no longer typical of architectural studies, and when used, it most often defines a chronological framework rather than a style. It is perhaps a truism that the study of architecture is most often ahead of its time and introduces new trends. What about the other side of the story? What about Ottoman art? Ottoman art is an imperial art, fully blossoming in the 16th century in the age of the great expansion and power of the empire under Suleiman the Great, the Magnificent. Its most conspicuous manifestation, best known to travelers and visitors, are the splendid architectural constructions, the culées of the sultans, and so is the so-called cut-fleur style in painting, the four flowers being the tulips, the carnation, the roses, and the hyacinths. Not only architectural or ceramic design, but also painting, manuscript, Quranic illumination, metalwork, jewelry, textiles, and so on were produced in costly workshops. As with most medieval and early modern empires, there is a court and a courtly art that serves the needs of the king, the emperor, or the sultan. There is thus a clear distinction between post-Byzantine religious and Ottoman imperial art. However, this distinction is too strict to me, too rigid, and is reminiscent of the barriers erected between the historiography of the Christian peoples of the Balkans and the Muslim Turks, especially with the sweeping advent of nationalism in the late 19th, first half of the 20th century. And here I'm quoting a bit Maria Todorova in Imagining Balkans. Post-Byzantine and Ottoman art were supposed to reside on two different planes, but parallel planes, that only ever meet by accidents, since, according to the then current bias, there is an inherent incompatibility between the local Christian people and Alayan Muslims. A strict division on religious land that prevented integration of population and the artistic production. Between old empires and new nations, however, more recent research is shifting away from ethnocentric history towards social, economic, and cultural history. In addition, recent studies of empire and analysis focusing on their adaptability and longevity, as well as the relationship between the imperial center and native elites. And I'm thinking here of Karen Barkey's Empire of Difference. So recent studies of empires reveal that whether it concerns ancient empires like the Roman or Achaemenid, or early modern terrestrial empires like the Habsburg or the Romanov, the vast territorial extent and the integration of different ethnic populations resulted in imperial art not being as uniform and unambiguous as once believed, and not just art. Other also manifestations of power. Following the same logic, it has been shown that Roman imperial art in Rome differs from Roman imperial art in Roman Asia Minor, or early Christian art in Rome from early Christian art in Roman Asia Minor. And the same happens with Achaemenid art in its own region in Hatlan in Iran and in the Achaemenid province of Egypt. These differences are due to the older local traditions, and as H.P. Colburn summarizes for Achaemenid art, there is an art of the empire produced in furtherance of imperial goals, and there is an art in the empire, meaning the artistic production of regions and people carrying past tradition but subject to Achaemenid rule. In the case of Ottoman and post-Byzantine art, the differences are not only local and regional but also confessional, related to religion and doctrine. I will close my paper with a few examples showing first that post-Byzantine and Ottoman art could coexist in the mid-16th century, and in several cases people, painters, workers, carvers, and so on were the same, and they were trained in both to paint Ottoman arabesque and gospel scenes. So the second group of slides I will show you are examples of 17th century courtly jewelry used by the elite classes of the capital, either Muslims, Christians, or Jews. And third, because this seminar is about the Baroque, I will show some Baroque decoration on silver, which was very prominent in the 18th century. And I will show you examples demonstrating the way I think it was introduced in the Ottoman Empire, I believe through Transylvania. So can we have the first slide, please? No, I'm pushing what? Okay, thank you. So this is a work of a non-Cretan religious painter of the 16th century by the name of Frangos Katellanos from Thebes, a prominent representative of the Ephorate school of painting. We will discover that this painter was most probably equally trained in Post-Byzantine and Ottoman painting. We know also of his work in Meteora. So here in the monastery of Philanthropinon in Yanina, on the small island in the lake of Yanina, we have this depiction of Christ as an angel, and the hello is the gesso hello is shows an Ottoman arabesque with a very prominent lotus flower. How can I? This is here. No. Anyway, you can see the hello and the lotus flower. I hope it's clear. No, No, the lotus flower is here. It's an open lotus flower. And here we have bilobed leaves.
Take the microphone close to your mouth, please.
Oh, sorry. So we have the. No, I don't know how to use this. Is it a pointer or turns the slides? Έχει
Το pointer πρέπει να είναι εδώ. Δεν είμαι σίγουρη. You need the... τι είναι αυτό που ακούγεται?
Το κόκκινο εκεί δά.
No idea.
No,
The pointer is...
No, so these are the beloved leaves that we found very often in... This is dated 1542, which is just a decade before the full blossoming of the cut fleur style. So we have here the Ottoman arabesque, which is the best. It is very it's synchronized with what we can see in Istanbul, in Constantinople. So I'm going now. The next. Again, the same monastery, the monastery of Philanthropinon on the lake in Yanina. You can see the design of the sanctuary apes showing the scene of the Holy Liturgy, and underneath there is a sequence of polylobed medallions. Oops, no. Sorry about that. No. Oops. I'm going to. No, here we are. Okay. So there is a series of polylobed medallions with large lotus flowers. This is kind of the lotus flowers and the kind of decoration that we see in the mid-16th century in Istanbul, and even before that. There is a poem of Jafer Çelebi, a court poet, that praises the architectural decoration of Mehmet Fatih Mosque in Istanbul, in Constantinople, Istanbul. And he calls these motifs Hatay or Hittite, meaning from China. This kind of ornament is often called International Timurid style, a term associated with the expansion of Timurid rule across the Eastern Islamic world, from Central Asia to India and the Ottoman territories, including, this is the most interesting part, including the Ottoman Balkans. And there is also another slide from these paintings from the monastery of Philanthropinon. This is a detail from a scene of an evangelist writing on his desk, and on the desk we can see his scissors and his papers, and there are two ceramic pots. One is an inkwell and the other is a jug. You can see, you will see 4 such daggers in the Benaki Museum made of silver. And you will see, but you will not see this type of inkwell, which is very rare. You are used to the long pen cases, Ottoman pen cases. This is a Chinese shape, very common in this period of Isnik. And the small Chinese pot is in the BM, in the British Museum. So this is about how the Ottoman art and post-Byzantine could coexist even in the 16th century. So, but the next slides will show you Ottoman jewelry. The main characteristics of this jewelry are gold, and with precious and semi-precious stones, and of course the use of enamel in various techniques. The lavish emphasis on precious stones reflects the aesthetic of 16th century Ottoman court object, an aesthetic common in the courts of powerful rulers, be it in the west or the east. So, but how do we call this, how this precious jewelry is in, we find it in Greece. These pieces are now in the Benaki Museum. When there is no inscription saying where the object is, it's the Benaki Museum. So this is courtly jewelry, normally called in Greece politica cosmimata, which means jewelry from the town, from the city of Constantinople. We use the second part of the word Constantinople to refer to this jewelry. So this jewelry is normally exhibited in museum together with traditional Greek jewelry, which is mostly from silver, and doesn't have anything to do with traditional jewelry. Okay. So this type of jewelry was made in the capital in the 17th century and reflects the power and wealth of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman capital became a center for the production of gem-studded jewelry, which was then channeled to the countries with which the empire had diplomatic relation or to its dependencies from, like Georgia and the Danubian principalities, or Russia and Iran, with which they had diplomatic relations. Best known, although, is that incredibly luxurious jewelry and other jewel-studded objects now kept in the Kremlin Museum. I'm sure you have seen such objects. Now here are the 3 engravings from a 1714 book by Charles Comte de Ferriol, Recueil des Sciences Estampes, showing in the center the Janissary Aga with this jewelry belt, and on the one side a Greek lady in her apartment, and on the other side a Turkish lady smoking, all wearing a nice and very expensive jeweled belts. The third type of, the third group of slides refers to Transylvania. The goldsmith art of Transylvania is considered a branch of Central European silversmithing. Between the 12th and the 14th century, Saxon German miners and craftsmen had come as colonists to settle in the land of Transylvania, imparting their knowledge of mining and working precious metal. Their descendants maintained their language and relations with their homeland. Apprentices and journeymen learned the craft in the South and North German workshops, bringing back pattern books and expertise, and are responsible for transmitting Central European styles, such as the Baroque, the Gothic and the Baroque, into Transylvania, Hungary, and Eastern Europe. The mixed composition of the guilds, Catholic Hungarians, Orthodox Romanes, and Protestant Saxons, explains the various clientele and our hesitation in giving an ethnic or religious identity to their art, because they were selling silverware. They were selling to whoever was ordered it. By the 16th and 17th centuries, luxury and liturgical objects were made in Brasov and Sibiu, the two main towns, more important towns for silversmithing. So they were made in liturgical objects by the order of the elite classes of Lachia and Moldavia, contributed thus to their fame and prestige. So what the boyars or later the fanariots were ordering were liturgical objects for Orthodox churches, and the Brasov and Sibiu silversmiths complied to the requirements of their Orthodox clientele. And so we have here two gospel books from Edirne, from Adrianople, both with a resurrection scene, but a resurrection in the manner of the Byzantine iconography, meaning this is the descent into hell and not the resurrection. So, but the prototype of these book covers is a 17th century Transylvanian model made both in Brasov and Sibiu, and there are in some monasteries such examples. But these are later, they are in 18th and early 19th century. And, but what I wanted to show you more is the decoration, the floral decoration, because this is very, very, this is the Baroque in silver. This is the floral Baroque. It's called floral Baroque. And you can see how the resurrection scene in the silver cover, book cover, gospel cover, is smaller than the other, because it wanted to give place, to give room for the floral decoration. These large open flowers, these are typical Baroque, the typical Baroque, and I'll show you some real examples. So this is a floral Baroque made in Transylvania in the mid 17th century, and now in the Budapest Museum. The hexagonal dishes were very typical of the period, and you can see the large flowers on the rim. This is the real thing, an Augsburg plate made in the mid 17th century. But the assay mark is a pineapple, which is a typical assay mark of Augsburg. And the initials are Tobias Graber, and this is how we know that it's made in Augsburg in the mid-17th century. And there is a later Greek inscription and medallion in the center, testifying to the dedication of this plate in a church, the Church of St. George, and the name of the donor, Hagis Keletourkourgi, 1729. So this was bought most probably in the bazaar of Istanbul or in Vlachia or Moldavia by Hagis Keletourkourgi. Now again another hexagonal plate. This time is in the Met, in the Metropolitan Museum, and look at this bigger with the super large flower, and then compare it with this floral Baroque decoration on a pair of liturgical scarves. Embroidered with silk and silver gilt wire and thread, and probably mid-18th century. The central scene is the scene of the Annunciation, but it's cut in two, one calf and the other calf. This is a Gabriel, no, this is Gabriel. Anyway, you can see Gabriel. And this is a very nice piece that shows how the patterns were made in the 18th century Constantinople. They had a ready-made rim with floral Baroque decoration, and according to the wishes of the client, they were making the central omphalos with the scene of the church which were dedicated, where they dedicated the pattern. So this is a church of the Annunciation in Sinope, in Anatolia, in Asia Minor. It is dated 1743, but it's not made in Sinope, although we know that in Sinope it's had a workshop of silver, manufacturing silver. It's probably made in Constantinople because it has a Tura of Mahmud I. unless we suppose that there was a service in Sinope stamping silver, which I don't think. So this is a very nice rim, ready-made, and the interior decoration of the omphalos is made with the church to which it was dedicated, but around it's more of the late 18th century style that we can see in other also patterns. So we have two different styles here, if you want to. Now, I will show you two examples from the Spinetta, the embroiderer's Spinetta, which is very well known, and you can see examples of her. Well, we can see this also in the Benaki. In 1682, the Spinetta was still a teenager. So she starts her embroidered work with this exceptional large veil, lamentation veil, and it's signed and it says made in Constantinople. I think it's somewhere, I'll find it, somewhere here. No. Anyway, better not to. So it says Constantinople somewhere here. Constantinople. And there's a date. And but I'm not showing this because of this, because of the floral Baroque decoration that frames the lamentations. It's floral Baroque, but it's not in relief. It's still the beginning, and still she's not a well-known embroideress. She's still in her early years, and I'll show you the next slide, where the Spinetta's general, and 15 years later, the decoration is in relief and more like a floral Baroque decoration. So this is what I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for listening.
Είναι λίγο σκοτεινά εκεί. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you especially for your analysis and definition of art in this period. So we have our second speaker, Nikolaos Vryzidis, from the School of Applied Art and Culture of the University of West Attica. And Nikolaos Vryzidis received his PhD at the University of London with a thesis on the aesthetic of Greek Orthodox ecclesiastical fabrics of the Ottoman period. So we'll continue with some of these embroideries or textiles that we began to see today. His research is centered on the applied and minor arts of the late and medieval and early sort of modern Mediterranean world, with particular reference to the intercultural sort of phenomena and artistic exchanges. He has published extensively on these subjects in scholarly journals, for example, in Convivium or the Mukarnas, which is a publication that I know very well from my school, as well as collective volumes. He's currently also exploring the concept of globalism and its local manifestations in the 18th century, a subject that he will also address today in his talk. And the topic and title of his paper is Networks of Pluriversality, not easy to pronounce, Trade, Diasporas, and Baroque textile culture in Ottoman Greece. Please welcome Mr. Vryzidis.
Okay. So thank you, Maria. Thank you, Alper, for, you can hear me, I guess you can hear me very well, yes, for organizing this very well thought workshop, which, I found yesterday's presentations, which I followed via YouTube, quite interesting. And thus I would like to congratulate both of you for that. Following Anna Ballian's essay about ahistorical terminology, my paper, Networks of Pluriversality, Trade, Diasporas, and Baroque textile culture in Ottoman Greece explores those networks of trade and global diasporas that contributed to the dissemination of imported textiles that can be perceived as Baroque in Ottoman Greece and beyond. Baroque period textiles are characterized by the heavily ornate style we see in European art and architecture, as well as the fertilization of European weaving productions with Asian elements. Nonetheless, the definition of a Baroque textile aesthetic in the Ottoman context seems to be like a more elusive task. Much of this difficulty can be traced first to the idea of Asian loans in Europe, the Ottoman Empire being a Eurasian polity, and second to the Ottomans' love for rich ornamentation in earlier periods as well, an aspect that was not unique to Baroque. In the Ottoman case, Baroque was an artistic mood that conveniently fell in line with local cultural sensibilities, a factor that perhaps explains its success and remarkable longevity. At the same time, an extensive network of diasporas centered on transcontinental trade connected the empire with both Western Europe and the rest of Asia, thus facilitating the spread of the global fashions of the time. Given that quite a few of these diasporic communities were Greek Orthodox, Greece naturally held a privileged position in the center of this dynamic. Textiles that fit into the Western definition of Baroque came to Greece from Venice, Vienna, and elsewhere, paving the way to a truly global eclecticism. One of the arguments implied by the proposed narrative is that this Ottoman Baroque eclecticism could be interpreted through networks of pluriversality, with their actors' space for mediation lying somewhere between local needs and global fashions. But let us begin from the start. There is no doubt that European fabrics enjoyed constant appreciation in the Ottoman context. For example, the love for Italian velvets at court can be traced both in the garments at the collection of the Topkapi and the Ottoman documents concerning the robes of honor, hilats, presented by the state. In fact, in the 16th century, the top robes of honor were of Italian velvets. Concerning the Greek case, one should take into account the evidence of textile terminology as words with an Italian Italian root competed in popularity with those of Ottoman derivation even in continental Greece. For example, the Greek term for velvet, veludo, derived from the Venetian veludo, is generally more often used than the Greek term katifes, which derives from the Ottoman kadife. What is more, it seems that more Italian terms have been transcribed into Greek, such as brocadon and brocadelon, which both correspond to figured woven fabrics. They appear in great abundance in the Greek inventories of the 17th and 18th centuries, perhaps pointing out the mercantile network that may have contributed to the flow of Italian fabrics of Baroque aesthetic at that time to Greece. A prominent branch of this network involved the the Greek Orthodox and Jewish merchants from Ioannina and Epirus in general that procured textiles in Venice and the rest of the Adriatic for the clients in Greece. Then this network was so deeply integrated into the fabric of culture that the Tesoro della Lingua Italiana e Greca Volgare, an early 18th century Greek-Italian dictionary, contains a subsection dedicated to textile terms. The pictured fabric is among the most luxurious that present the Baroque aesthetic and can be attributed to Italian weaving. Its three-dimensionality is thanks to the use of loops of silver thread for the pattern against a metal ground. It is quite remarkable. Yellow silk threads are only visible in the outlines of the individual motifs. The rest of the surface is of metallical threads. But Baroque is also characterized by the emergence of exuberant patterns in woven fabrics known as bizarre, sometime in the late 1600s, reaching its apogee in the early 1700s. This has been viewed as a creative response to Asian imports, be it West, Central, or East Asian, and their deeper integration into the fabric of European material culture. Asymmetrical patterns, largely based on exotic vegetal ornament, became standard for fabrics that were both used for the tailoring of clothing items and furnishing homes. This style disseminated widely in France, Italy, England, and elsewhere, essentially becoming global. It can be assumed that such fabrics arrived in the Ottoman market, considering that the French imports seemed to rise in popularity in the first decades of the 18th century. It can also be assumed that such fabrics were readily available in continental Greece through the network already mentioned. In the pictured vestment from Karakal Monastery, Ephelonion, we see three different European fabrics. All three seem to date to the 18th century, with the one used around the neck belonging to the bizarre style of the early 18th century. And there are a lot more of these fabrics in museums and sacristies of Greece, which await to be studied. This trend of the import of French and European fabrics continues throughout the 18th century and infiltrates the material culture of the wider society, not just of the elite. This 19th century doulamas is tailored of a second-class woven fabric attributable to 18th century France, Lyon, to be more specific. Bon pour l'Orient, or good for the Orient, as the expression used to be. These fabrics became standard for dress and furnishings of the Greek middle class, a large part of which made its fortune in trade. Considering the aesthetic of these fabrics, the Ottoman case presents certain specificities. As already mentioned, exuberant vegetal ornament was no stranger to material culture in this part of the world. It is perhaps the new sense of movement, asymmetry, and exoticism brought about with Baroque that differ from older fashions. In this case, one should also explore the contribution of those Asian productions that became popular during the Baroque period to Ottoman material culture and contribution to the emergence of the so-called bizarre patterns. China is often credited to be among those sources for bizarre ornament, and as it happens, Chinese fabrics of the 18th century survive in certain collections of the time's elite. For example, this vestment is associated with the Patriarch of Constantinople, Neophytos VI, and is today in the collection of the monastery of St. John the Theologian in Patmos. It is made of an embroidery for which a Chinese attribution could be explored, certainly Asian, if not Chinese, as is also a later garment from the Topkapi associated with Princess Fatima, the daughter of Sultan Mustafa III. I don't have an image of that garment, but it has been published and it has been given a Chinese attribution. Another example, which certainly Chinese, is this ecclesiastical vestment made of a Chinese court rank badge, a very refined embroidery depicting a bird, most probably an egret. This consumption pattern remains underexplored, but judging from the number of surviving material remnants, it seems hard to support that it could be compared to the amount of Chinese fabrics made for export to Europe. However, one should note the role of the Dutch East India Company in this type of intercontinental trade, with Amsterdam acting as an entrepot for Chinese fabrics. As a matter of fact, we know of the commercial activities of the Dutch in the Ottoman Empire, as well as the role of Greek subjects, yes, of the empire in its workforce, as a relatively recent study by Hassan Cholak has pointed out. Far more intense seems to have been the contact with India, especially towards the 18th century, as research by Amanda Phillips and Suraya Faruqi has underlined. The reception of Indian fabrics by the Ottoman market, as well as the migration of Indian artisans, has led to the creation of what has been called by Suraya Faruqi Indo-Ottoman fabrics, and this term refers to a local production that followed Indian prototypes. In my view, the evidence from Greek historical collections can offer a view of this trend and the type of relevant textiles that circulated then. You see, for example, this good quality chain stitch embroidery, silk threads on cotton, traditionally attributed to northwestern India, Gujarat to be more specific, many examples of which we find in Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries. Hardly Baroque in the strict sense, Indian fabrics contributed to the pluriversality of Ottoman material culture and should be interpreted also in light of the Greek merchant communities that developed in India from the 18th to the 19th century, with the case of the Hiot Rallis family being perhaps the most well-known. Then the motifs and palette one also finds in quite a few block-printed fabrics suggests an association with India, if not provenance. A prime example is this cloth from the Great Meteoron Monastery, which could either be Indian or a local imitation. But perhaps the most lasting transplant from this part of the world into Greek and Ottoman in general aesthetic is the so-called Lahouri patterns, meaning the pine cone motifs also shared with Iranian fabrics of the time. Lahouri, a term that seems to derive from the association of these fabrics with the port from which they were shipped to the Ottoman Empire, became a traditional pattern in the Greek case, appearing in folk costumes of many different regions. But, of course, and I'm showing again the same, yes, the same embroidery. In the Greek case, one cannot discuss Baroque without referring to ecclesiastical embroidery. One could argue that post-Byzantine art, if that is how you would call the art of the Greek Orthodox community after the fall of Constantinople, can be quite susceptible to Western loans, especially when considering the issue of Christian iconography. You see, for example, this embroidery made that has already been studied by Anna Ballian, and into which she also referred in her presentation, made by famed Constantinopolitan embroideress Despinetta, seems to have absorbed elements from Italian painting in her rendering of the adoration of the Magi, such as the dark-skinned, perhaps African Mago, as well as the rich ornamental or rich vegetal ornament on the four corners, as she has already pointed out. I think that the ornament in the yellow-silver sackos that we have seen earlier somehow relates to these of the embroidery, although the proportions are quite different, I would say. And as Anna has already shown, the Constantinopolitan workshops produced ecclesiastical and also secular embroideries which present even more Baroque features during the 18th century, and perhaps even a homogenization and standardization in their aesthetic, an element that implies the universal and enduring appeal that this orientation towards Europe had. But the most Baroque of all ecclesiastical embroideries used by the Greek Orthodox communities are those made in Central European workshops, such as those of Vienna. These refined artifacts can be viewed as traces of yet another mercantile network, which connects lands of what is today northern Greece with the Greek communities of the Habsburg realms. As one would expect, these embroideries are Western in style and more often than not present the palette and decorative exaggeration for which Baroque is well known for. The wide circulation of these embroideries in primarily urban and monastic settings in Epirus, Macedonia, and Thessaly confirm their status as evidence of the contacts that the thriving Greek diaspora retained with their homelands. As you can see, this is a manifestly hybrid production, quite Western in its style, but made under Greek Orthodox patronage. The pictured vestment is a prelatic sakos used to belong to Ioannikios, the bishop of Mellenikon, which is a townlet in today's southwest Bulgaria, quite close to the Greek border actually. It is signed by the famed Christophoros Zefarovich, a painter, designer, and embroiderer of assumed Slavic origin. Some people say that he was Serb. The use of golden elaborate frames for Christ's ancestors in the representation of the tree of Jesse is a pictorial device that clearly stems from Baroque, as is the pastel palette. Thus, overall, I would suggest that the pluralism and pluriversality that characterized Ottoman Greek textile culture can offer an alternative map of those trade networks that connected the empire with the rest of the world. It is also worth underlining that the Greek element was either present or dominant in these networks, from the regional routes of the Adriatic and Central Europe to the long-distance trade with China and India, essentially playing the role of the intermediary for many, if not all, of these trends. Baroque or not, according to the European conception of the term, this eclectic, cosmopolitan, and above all exuberant aesthetic was the expression of a truly global turn, the mechanics of which were at least in part operated by the Greek subjects of the empire. Finally, I think that the other side of the same coin would be the globalism that fabrics produced in connection to these contexts presented, with Chios being a prime example, as Anna Ballian's research has also pointed out. But I guess this is another discussion which can wait for another day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love the details of these embroideries, I have to say. And obviously it was becoming very clear how global and international all this material is. Thank you very much. Our third speaker is Dimitrios Liakos from the Ephorate of Antiquities of Chalkidike and Mount Athos at the Hellenic Ministry of Culture. Dimitrios Liakos is basically an archaeologist, or he considers himself as that. He studied at the University of Thessaloniki, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and history and archaeology. And he received his PhD in 2000 with a study of what would be Byzantine and post-Byzantine art and architecture. His dissertation actually was entitled Post-Byzantine Sculpture on Mount Athos. And so we're moving today in this part of the session, from textiles, soft materials, to sculpture. He teaches at the Faculty of Theology at the Aristotle University at the program, which is a postgraduate sort of study program, and topics like spirituality, history of art, and the musical tradition of Mount Athos. His research has focused in many Byzantine and post-Byzantine art, on Mount Athos basically, but also in other regions like Albania, Crete, Cyprus, and so on, and the Dodecanese. And he has published many articles. He contributed to various collective volumes. And today he's going to talk to us, or he presents observations on 18th century sculpture in mainland Greece, the cases of Thessaly and Mount Athos. Please welcome Dimitrios Liakos. Oh, there you are. I was looking.
Good morning. Okay. First of all, I would like to express my thanks to the organizing committee, Maria and Alper, for the invitation to participate in this outstanding symposium. From the mid-15th to the end of the 17th century, sculpture in mainland Greece went into a phase of decline, as can be seen from the few surviving pieces. This picture began to change from the early 18th century onwards as sculpture flourished in the context of the renaissance of Hellenism and the growth of artistic production. Many churches, built in the 18th and 19th century, bear sculptural decoration, mainly in embedded slabs on the outer facades and door frames. Until recently, the sculpture of the period after the fall of Constantinople in mainland Greece has received very little attention from scholarship. Kytsos Makris and Victoria Nikita were the first to note the significance of the 18th-19th century sculpture in Western Macedonia and Pelion. The more systematic study started after 2000. The speaker and other scholars, Victoria Nikita, Lena Gourioti, Alekos Florakis, Maria Tsoupiremou, and Maria Koletsiou, opened up new perspectives in the study of the relief decoration in the post-Byzantine era in certain regions, Mount Athos, Thessaly, and Epirus. They focused on sculptural decoration in churches and other small structures, such as fountains and fiale in Mount Athos. Corresponding works in secular buildings are little known or unknown, as there are only sporadic references in papers concerning their architecture. The known pieces encountered in churches and monastic complexes offer the opportunity to draw safe conclusions about stylistic trends, the dynamics of the craftsmen, as well as their origin. These topics will be discussed here through the presentation of selected 18th century works from Thessaly and Mount Athos, as in this region sculpture has been studied more extensively. These are a variety of compositions rendered either in relief, low or high, but also incised, mainly in slabs embedded in outer facades or pavements, but also in door frames. The decoration comes from the Byzantine tradition. Religious scenes, saints, crosses, double-headed eagles are represented, as well as animal figures and vegetal ornaments. In certain cases, the decoration is dominated by Baroque motifs. The inscriptions, where they exist, and the stylistic features show that a large part of the 18th century sculptures of churches in Macedonia and Thessaly is due to craftsmen from Western Macedonia, an important center of builders and craftsmen in the 18th and 19th centuries, who were organized in associations, the so-called Isnafia, and used to travel and work in many areas of mainland Greece. From the village Zoupani, today Pentalofos, comes one of the most famous craftsmen of the late 18th century, Milios Zoupaniopoulitis. He was particularly productive in his homeland, where he worked from 1783 to 1795, the reliefs in the Catholicon of the Monastery of the Holy Trinity in Zoupani, which he carved shortly before 1795, revealed the maturity of his work. From 1795 until 1797, Milios was active in Pelion, joining the team of the builder Dimos Zoupaniotis. In Pelion, he carved slabs and door frames in many churches in Makrinitsa, Liakos, Siki, and elsewhere. An unsigned work that can be attributed to Milios is the northern door frame of the Catholicon of the Monastery of the Dormition in Tripotamos of Pindos. The style is similar to the slightly earlier work of the Monastery of the Holy Trinity in Zoupani. In both cases, Milios rendered flat and unidimensional forms with shaped features without particular attention to proportions and volumes, but with exceptional care in decorativeness. Alongside local craftsmen working in Pelion, Dimos, Kostas, and Damaskinos carved the door frame of the main church of the Catholicon of the Monastery St. Nikolaos in Argalasti. At the beginning of the 19th century, two more craftsmen are known who worked in Pelion. The first of them is the local craftsman Vangelinos, who decorated churches in Athens, Anovolos, Agora, and elsewhere. The other is Theodosios from the village Vracha in the mundane Agrafa. He carved the sculptures in the church of St. John the Baptist in Makrinitsa. The above pieces are characterized by dry rendering, flatness, and schematization. The sculptures in the church of St. Marino of Kissos in Pelion betray a different trend. The decoration in door frames is rendered in high relief and elaborate technique. Notable are the flat rosettes and mukarnas, motifs widely found in the artistic vocabulary of the craftsmen from Constantinople and Chios. One of the door frames bears the inscription Triandaphilos. The name either of the craftsman or the patron. In the case of the craftsman, he, as the style shows, seems to have had knowledge of the patterns associated with Constantinople and Chios. The flat rosettes and mukarnas are widespread motifs in the sculpture of Constantinople, as well as in works made by craftsmen from Chios. Besides, as research has shown, the patterns of the Ottoman capital spread throughout the Aegean through the movement of craftsmen to Constantinople, as well as the export of many works from its workshops. Okay. In the outer facade of the exonarches of the Catholicon in the Monastery of Iviron, Mount Athos, 4 slabs decorated with vegetal ornaments and rosette have been embedded. Both the low relief and the dry rendering of motifs refer with certainty to sculptural decoration of the church of St. Nikolaos in Messaria of Andros, carved by named craftsmen from Chios, Nikolaos Volscianos and his sons Ioannis and Frankoulis in 1734. The above features characterize a stylistic trend cultivated by craftsmen of Chios origin, who, as we know thanks to epigraphic evidence, worked in Andros during the first half of the 17th century. The simple and refined style found in the aforementioned works from Pelion also characterizes a significant amount of works in churches of Western Macedonia and Epirus in the 18th and 19th century. Their decoration is dominated by common motifs from the Byzantine tradition, saints, religious scenes, crosses, double-headed eagles, rosettes, and vegetal ornaments, which are rendered in the schematic but carefully designed way. In the same context are the works of the craftsman monk Liakos, who carved 2 fountains in Megisti Lavra in 1764. The motifs from the Byzantine tradition, double-headed eagle and hare group, cypresses and birds, coexist with the arch ogive of Islamic origin. The schematized figures, the linear, dry, flat relief, indicates knowledge of the simplistic and pretentious trend that dominated in sculptural decoration of churches in Macedonia, Epirus, and Thessaly in the 18th century. A striking feature characterizes the sculpture in Mount Athos. Apart from the sufficient number of pieces related to artistic trend cultivated by craftsmen from Western Macedonia, there are also works connected with craftsmen from Chios and Constantinople. Three slabs at Vatopedi seem to fit to the same style. These are the reliefs on the pavement of the main church in the chapel of St. Andrew, on the pavement of the exonathics of the Catholicon, and the slab in the fountain next to the belfry. They bear the common motif of the double-headed eagle, rendering in an almost similar type with variations in specific details. In all 3 works, the motifs are rendered in low relief and are characterized by a tendency to simplification. These elements are found in 18th century examples decorating churches in Macedonia, Epirus, and Thessaly, carved either by local craftsmen or by craftsmen from Western Macedonia. The same features continue to appear in 19th century works. We can see here some 19th century works in Mount Athos and Western Macedonia. The majority of 18th century sculptures in Mount Athos are linked to the production of craftsmen from Chios. We have already mentioned the examples in the exonarchs of the Catholicon in Iviron. 2 more typical works are found in the same monastery. The decoration in the central door frame of the Liti in the Catholicon refers to similar examples in Cyclades as the Templon of Zodochos Pigi in Naxos. We see the similar capitals, which are considered to have been carved by craftsmen from Chios. In the fountain next to the refectory, constructed in 1852, a relief slab has been placed in second use. The scroll surrounding the central composition is closely related to similar examples carved by craftsmen from Chios in the second half of the early 19th century as the door frame in the Catholicon of the monastery of St. Nikolaos in Andros. Of particular interest is the fiale of the monastery of Xiropotamou. The central font, in fact, and a big marble vessel, was carved in Chios in 1764, when it was transferred to the monastery according to the notes of expenses written by Kesarios Dapontes, the second founder of the monastery. The peristyle was added in 1783 according to the dedicator inscription in a panel. In this panel, the scroll is similar to that in the above-mentioned fountain in Iviron, the decoration of which, as we noted, is linked to craftsmen from Chios. These analogies are of particular importance for determining the origin of the artistic trend of the sculptural decoration of the above-mentioned examples, if we take into account the significant role that Chios seems to have played in the development of the 18th century sculpture and its spread in the Aegean, according to the results of research to the present day. In many of the night monasteries, Megisti Lavra, Zographou, Karakallou, Philotheo, and others, there are sculptures that share stylistic features with works made by craftsmen from Chios, as the Templon of Photodotis Christos in the monastery of Panachrandou in Andros, which probably indicates their common origin or at least reflects the same artistic background. The same artistic context is also reflected in the decoration of some works in the monastery of Hilandar. The door frame of the exonarchics of the Catholicon and the fiali, the star is similar, suggesting that they were made by the same workshop. In the monastery of Xeropotamu, there is a group of works related to craftsmen from Constantinople based on the notes of expenses written by Kessarios Dapontes. The construction of the Catholicon was carried out in 1762-1763 by builders who came from Constantinople, whose members included experienced craftsmen who undertook to carry out some of the necessary marble work, the construction of the reliefs, incorporated into the church, and the door frames in the liti. Along with the construction of the aforementioned sculptures on site at the monastery during the construction of the Catholicon, the relief icons of the Virgin Mary of the Gitria and the Exonarchs of the Catholicon, as well as the Zoodokos Pigi in the belfry, were kept in Constantinople between 1760-1763 and then transferred to the monastery on the initiative of Kessarios Dapontes according to his notes of expenses. The door frames of the main church of the Catholicon were made by the architect Constantine. He is the architect of Laleli Jami, who, apart from his excellent skills in architectural design, was also an excellent marble carver. These works reveal the high artistic standard of the craftsmen active in Constantinople in the 18th century, which was also maintained in the first half of the 19th century, as can be seen from the elaborate decoration of the door frames. Κόλλησε. Δεν γυρίζει. Δεν πάει πουθενά. Δεν, ούτε αυτό λειτουργεί, ούτε... Sorry. Ευχαριστώ. Sorry for this. As can be seen from the elaborate decoration of the door frames of the new Catholicon of the monastery of Xenophontos, which were carved in 1833 by Christakis Agimantzipasis in Constantinople, as were informed by written searches, the information I found in the unpublished Codex 262 of the monastery. Another work that can be linked to the artistic milieu of Constantinople is the fountain next to the entrance to the monastery of Iviru in 1735. The rich and high-quality decoration in terms of the general conception of the compositions and the motifs, mukarnas, vases with flowers, etc., is reminiscent of fountains of the first half of the 18th century in Constantinople. Obviously, the craftsman who made it was aware of the artistic trends in Constantinople, where he had probably worked. The analogies in high quality and the artistic vocabulary between works attributed to craftsmen from Chios and craftsmen working in Constantinople led to the hypothesis of the close relationship between artistic productions in both areas, likely based on a common first-line tradition. The use of specific motifs, flat rosette, shell, and mukarnas is notable. As we know, thanks to the traveler's description, the monk André Teve, who visited Chios in the 16th century, and Nicolas de Nicolai, who visited the island in 1551, the cures in Mountain Pelineon were already operating from the 16th century onwards. Moreover, the craftsmen from Chios, which had marble as a raw material, saw a remarkable mobility and even reached Palestine. It's very likely that they were also working in the main artistic center of the period, the Constantinople, from where they carried out carried first-line models, which they distributed in the Aegean and elsewhere, as Haralambos Bouras has aptly argued. In Constantinople, they obviously assimilated elements of the artistic style as it was formed there through the coexistence and interaction of different artistic trends, which they then transferred in the areas where they were working. The influence of the artistic production of Constantinople with Baroque as a dominant element is also evident in the first decades of the 19th century. Some of the fountains in the monasteries of Dionysius, Stavronikita, and Karakalu carry high-quality models of the Ottoman capital. To sum up, 18th century sculpture in Thessaly, as is demonstrated by the examples we have discussed here, but also by other works, either published or still unknown, is characterized by the activity of craftsmen mainly from Western Macedonia, who traveled to various regions as members of building companies. Especially Pelion is the most typical area where craftsmen from Western Macedonia traveled, worked, and in some cases settled according to the findings of the recent doctoral thesis of Maria Koletsiou. However, local craftsmen or craftsmen from other regions were also active, such as Theodosios from the village Vracha in the mountain Agrafa. Mount Athos is a special case study. The sculptures adorn Catholica, chapels, fountains, and fiale reflect various trends and therefore different origins of their craftsmen. The number of works attributed to craftsmen from Western Macedonia, as well as Northern Epirus, from the early 19th century and on, we see here a fountain in Lavra made by craftsman Andreas from Argyrokastron, is restricted when compared to the large number of works associated with the production of craftsmen from Chios. In addition, these are few but noteworthy examples related to the activity of workshops from Constantinople. It is for this reason that the study of the sculpture of Mount Athos is particularly significant, because it complements our knowledge of the production of different workshops active in a specific area. In other words, Mount Athos was an area where craftsmen and artists from various regions moved freely and thus functioned as a place where heterogeneous stylistic trends coexisted. And one last comment, the sculptural production of the 18th century in Pelion and Mount Athos is characterized by a common factor. Pelion remained a relative free place without restrictions and prohibitions, with a few exceptions which favored artistic production. Freedom of artistic expression also existed in Mount Athos. The Athonite enjoyed a favorable status from the Ottoman administration, and so artistic expression developed freely. As already mentioned, Mount Athos is the only area in mainland Greece where marble craftsmen from the Cyclades and Constantinople were active. This fact betrays the open mind of the Athonite monks, who were receptive to new artistic trends, which is why they commissioned craftsmen from the most famous artistic centers. When craftsmen from Tinos began to be active in the Cyclades from the beginning of the 19th century onwards, they also appeared dynamically in Mount Athos. Recently, I have found documents relating to the activity of craftsmen from Tinos in the monastery of St. Panteleimon, Mount Athos, in the 19th century. These unpublished sources will be the topic of another paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we're going to have, I don't know how much time, but some time for...
11:15 according to the program, so we have time.
We have time, plenty of time, great, to have some questions. Thank you very much, and I was very surprised to hear how much these Chiot carvers were doing work all over the place, and I'm surprised that we didn't see anything from Chios that was carved by them, so I don't know, next time perhaps. So please raise your hands for questions so that the mic can be passed on. Well, oh, there we go. I can't see.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a question for Anna. Well, in Greece, in general, some of us, we like Ottoman, to use Ottoman instead of post-Byzantine, because obviously, I mean, it gets us out of a narrow ethnocentric view of this period and this art. However, it's not, I mean, Ottoman art, on the other hand, to use Ottoman on the other hand, it's not a solution. In some cases, I mean, it gets you identified with Ottoman imperial art, or in Turkey, sometimes Ottoman is being interpreted with narrow nationalistic terms as well. So, in the end, we have terms, political terms, like post-Byzantine, obviously with a reference to Byzantium, Neo-Hellenic, a term also used in some cases with reference to modern Greece, or Ottoman with reference to Ottoman Empire's successor, Turkey. My question is, okay, so we have to define our terms. An artistic term would be a solution to use, I don't know, Baroque or something like this for this art. This is my question to Anna and to Nikos, because he mentioned that. You mentioned middle class, Greek middle class, a term coming from social history. Is it a solution for this kind of art? Art of the middle class, of the notables, of the Aegean, of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, or not? Just a question.
Well, I'm not sure I can answer because it's so difficult to deprive, let's say, art from the term post-Byzantine. Because when we talk about painting, can we say Ottoman painting for the paintings of the, I don't know, for the Meteora or the 16th century Cretan school? So it's better to cut it in pieces. So it's different. It's different in painting, and it's different in silverware, or in textiles. There's so much European influence in textiles that, what can you say? You can say Baroque. Even Baroque in Ottoman art, it's not really Baroque. It's Baroque and Rococo all together, especially in the 18th century. Baroque is only, I think floral Baroque is floral Baroque. What we see in Europe, we see it also in the Ottoman Empire, in post-Byzantine art, in Ottoman art, everywhere. Armenian art, Georgian art. You can see floral Baroque. So you call it floral Baroque. But you cannot talk about Ottoman art in painting. This is. So I'm not ready to give an answer. I thought first that we can say Christian art in the Ottoman Empire, or ecclesiastical art in the Ottoman Empire. I'm using this term sometimes because I want to avoid the term post-Byzantine. But it's not always clear. And when I read this book, on this article on Achaemenid art, dividing the two, saying this is an art of the empire and this is an art in the empire, I said, this is the solution. But there is no term to this solution. The terminology is not. And I also liked very much the empire thing about what I read in Karen Barclay's book. It explains everything, because we look at an imperial art through the eyes of the national art, and it's different. We shouldn't look at that. So I'm not sure I have answered, but perhaps you can make it better.
I have a different question to answer, which I find very interesting, and thank you for this question. I think that what you said raises an important question in relation to the aesthetic according to class, let's say, or according to the means that people had to spend, the money that they had to spend on these fabrics. You will see, am I close enough? Oh, yes. Okay, great. Louder. Okay, let me, yes. I have a wonderful voice for radio, but not for conferences, I guess. Yes. So the same aesthetic, you find it in the different classes. The difference is the material. So you can have a very, let's say, modest, block printed cotton textile, which will imitate the motifs of, you know, the silk of the more costly. So in that respect, it's important to make these distinctions, let's say, according to class, to see, you know, what people had access to, what different people had access to, and then let's say see whether there was what we would call a folk aesthetic, or whether this folk aesthetic, I don't know, popular aesthetic, let's say, not folk aesthetic, popular aesthetic, would follow that of the elite or try to follow it. So I don't know whether you're covered. Great.
I want to throw more fuel to this very productive fire of discussing. So yeah, I want to throw more fuel to this very productive fire of discussing terms, but I'll do it in the most boring way. So post-Byzantine seems to be an interesting term to use as a historical term, what happens after Byzantium, but it also seems to be a stylistic characterization, a sort of a retaining of a painterly manner. I somehow think that it gets more exciting when we talk about chronology in the most boring way. It seems as though what links a lot of the things that we're talking about is that they all happen simultaneously in the 18th century. So what happens if we omit terms like Ottoman and post-Byzantine and say they were actually dealing with what happens in the 18th century in the Aegean, in the Balkans, in Central Europe, in India, and the ports that connect all of those places in the 18th century? Does that make any sense? Pardon? Save or open up more sort of interdisciplinary discussions simply on the basis of chronology and geography.
Should I follow up on that? Because my question was also related to terminology. No, great idea, saved by chronology. But I also had the same question. I was wondering whether we establish a neutral use of the Ottoman and speak of, and not a nationalistic use of the term Ottoman. In this case, we have a denominator. I mean, I was wondering whether how would you think about what would you think about the suggestion of replacing post-Byzantine with Ottoman Christian art, for instance, as you said, and just to open also another dimension here, I was wondering whether how in art history that is produced in Turkey today, whether this, first of all, whether there is a distinction between secular and religious for this period in the same way, and how, I mean, are Turkish art historians that are working on secular art of the empire, for instance, are they interested in studying what is happening in Siatista, in peripheral, let's say, places of the empire, and how do they talk about that? And I mean, this is where we should look also in order to have a better sense of the categories.
Yes. I think I can say a couple of things on this. Well, first of all terms are conventions, so we have to make peace with this. All terms include some stuff and exclude some other. So it's important to clarify what's the convention first while using the terms. The problem about, I mean, we should advocate maybe for the use of the term Ottoman as, because these were really people circulating in the Ottoman world, and try to get rid of the use of the Ottoman, as it happens in contemporary Turkey, as a mirrored national label to use against who are not one of us today, etc. But what I think about the term, especially Baroque, because we have a wonderful bouquet of 20,000 flowers, and we call it a rose bouquet. I mean, they are elements from Baroque decoration that we can call these are Baroque-inspired decorations, these are Baroque-inspired or Rococo-inspired decorations. But using the term Ottoman Baroque to such a complex and multi-layered and nuanced arts and cultural phenomenon flattens so much its richness and its originality. And after all, Baroque has very specific connotations in the West. It is related to Counter-Reformation. I mean, you cannot use terms because they are juicy and appealing to scholarship. They have to be as precise, as well calculated as possible. So, I mean, we can keep both Ottoman, we can keep both Baroque, but we should just be more millimetric and more precise in where and why. And I would really like to thank you for this session, because like this helps me, this helps, like this I'm not resulting as Hios obsessed. It's not my personal perversion. Hios comes in every discussion. I'm so happy. I would just like to remind that in 1694 there is a few months of Venetian control on Hios, which makes what comes after very important, very different, because the Ottoman authorities have a new eye on Hios in after 1694, and many people, I believe, this is a hypothesis, you might agree, and I'm asking this a question to all of you. I mean, I believe that many people rebrand themselves coming from the archipelago as Chians, because Chian meant good quality. I believe people coming from the region usually could have used this term as like, I'm Chian, I'm a good carver, I'm Chian, I'm a good artist. Would you agree on that? I mean, it's a speculation, but would you agree on that?
Has a Chian in its past. Because it's something. It's in fact, when I was studying the Chian silks, I discovered that both my grandparents were somehow related to Chios. So I was very proud, but doesn't show. Anyway, I think it's very difficult. The terminology is something very difficult. I don't think we can ever will be, we'll forget the post-Byzantine thing, but it's so it's so badly used by Byzantinologists that makes people of the other side react a bit. I think Ottoman is a general term that goes well, as long as it's not ethnocentric, as with the post-Byzantine. So I don't think I have anything else to say. Please.
What should I say about Chios or terminology? Yeah.
Anything you like.
Anything you like. Perhaps the. Maybe those questions will save us from the post-Byzantine. Yes.
It's a long question, but it relates to what we're talking about, and it is, how important is it to keep reviewing terms and concepts? Is it, example, Byzantine, post-Byzantine, Ottoman, Turkish. When must, should, or can we use what? We like to discuss it constantly and want to find the perfect solution. Second example. In the West, we call him Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. In Turkish, he becomes Sultan Suleiman the Lawgiver, right? So if we want to be correct and authentic, why don't we rename him uniformly in international scholarship and research? So why do we change all these things? So I guess that's what the question is. A bit long, but I had trouble reading it. Sorry.
Maybe the Academy of Athens can decide on that.
Big question. Oh my God.
I like the Magnificent because it goes with the Lavrendio. Okay. There was nothing serious about that.
No, she said she liked the Magnificent because that sounds very nice, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Second question from a different person, Natasha Lemos. Thank you very much for such interesting papers. A question to Dr. Liakos. Do we know more about the architect Konstantinos and his involvement in the Lali Jami?
No.
No is the answer. Just no.
Only he built the Lali Jami and the frames of Catholicon Xervotamou. I don't know other information for him. You can see the monograph of Milos Polivio, the Catholicon of Monastery of Xervotamou, for more details in this.
Don't answer to me because I didn't ask the question.
But down there.
From one of our listeners here, or any more questions? Yes, please.
If we have time, Dimitrios, my question is obviously to you.
Closer. The mic needs to be put closer.
Question. What kind of archival is this on? Oh, sorry. It's a simple question, simple archival question. Where do we go for these craftsmen of Chios who go to carve all of these fabulous 18th century reliefs?
They have not written evidence, only few. My hypothesis is based on the stylistic features. On the inscribed works from craftsmen from Chios in Andros and elsewhere, and compare with other works on Mount Athos.
So there are no payment documents like the one that we have from Jerusalem that actually have lists of names and names of people.
The names of craftsmen from Chios in Andros, you mean?
Yeah.
There is the inscription.
Okay. Okay. Inscription.
Okay.
And one last just food for thought. When Nikos, and thanks to Nikos, I was able to meet a marble carver Tuesday night who helped with the restoration of the Holy Edukil in the 1990s. And when I asked him, well, when you're standing in the middle of this, what to my eyes looks very Ottoman Baroque because it references what goes on in the capital of the Chapel of the Holy Angel, he said it looked Byzantine. Right? Referring to a craft tradition that is elaborate and elegant and learned and good. So, obviously, someone who's sort of seen Ottoman Baroque in it and talking to a craftsman in the, in that field, touching this object, for him to read as Byzantine was sort of enlightening to me.
I just want to add that I didn't mention who was the person who asked the first question. This was Theo Marinos. Sorry for not paying too much attention to all of this. And then also we received from Natasha Lemos a thank you note for the answers. So I just want to be correct. So I think at this point we can thank our speakers first and then proceed downstairs for a coffee. Thank you very much.
Okay, please take your seats. I would like to welcome you to the last session of this very fruitful symposium and very successful. I was told by the organizers that there is great interest online as well, more than 2,000 views. And this shows, I think, that when we are eager to cross academic borders between our fields, we get interesting, the general interest as well. Now, I'm here to present our two last but not least speakers, and I will start with Elizabeth Fowden. Elizabeth studied classics with an emphasis on late antique history at Princeton University. Her work focuses on the intersection of Hellenism, Christianity, and Islam as lived out in geographical and architectural space. Her early work concentrated on Greater Syria and Arabia, but over the past decade, we are lucky to have her in our chronological period. She has turned to the early modern period and studies unexplored Ottoman views of the antiquities of Athens and beyond. Published or forthcoming are several of her articles on particular buildings and a monograph we are all waiting for on the Parthenon Mosque. So, Elizabeth, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elias. I think the last time that I spoke at this podium, I was introduced, and my book was just forthcoming on the Parthenon Mosque. Well, it's still, I keep you on the edge of your seats. Oh, dear. So I thank the organizers, but I have to say I did protest, and you know the fact that what I'm working on is almost the opposite about what we've been talking about, because the more and more I look at the Ottoman educated interpretations of Greek antiquities, and they do exist, I'm finding actually very little cross-fertilization with other views. But anyway, I always like to be a bit controversial, or at least contrarian, so here we go. I think I need the glasses. Yes. In 1811, the dramatist... Yeah? Okay. In 1811, isn't that too loud? The dramatist August von Kotzebue wrote a play to celebrate the opening of the Deutsches Theater in Pest. He chose to dramatize the degradation of Greek civilization. In Ottoman Athens, and its revival in the Danubian city. Ludwig van Beethoven was commissioned to write the incidental music. The catchy title, The Ruins of Athens, and memorable Turkish march have attracted more attention than the play's action, in which the goddess Athena, emerging from a 2,000-year seclusion, is guided round modern Athens by Hermes. The divine pair encounter a Greek man crushing rice on a battered Doric column base, and a young woman who should have been weaving a peplos for the goddess, selling figs instead. Now, as Athena cross-questions the impoverished Athenians, a janissary passes and announces that the pasha wants a column to tie up his horse, and a marble sarcophagus for a manger. The goddess asks about the tower dedicated to the god of the winds, only to learn that it has been converted to a mosque. Where Boreas dwelt, caressed by Zephyr, you can now hear choruses of dervishes. So by the early 19th century, the state of Athens' ravished antiquities was titillating enough to serve as popular entertainment. Antiquity, for half a century, travelers to Greece had been bringing back depictions of ruins peopled with locals in exotic dress, as well as measured architectural drawings of ancient temples. News of what we today call architectural reuse, and what Hermes called desecration, had colored people's perceptions of Ottoman Athens thanks to descriptions of Ottoman dervish ceremonies in the tower turned tekke and the well-known drawings of Edward Dodwell. Turks, as viewed by Europeans, saw ancient art as raw materials to be reused or deliberately destroyed. The ruins of Athens had traction because it reflected European characterizations of Turks as ignorant about ancient Greek culture, in contrast to Europeans, who were, of course, its heirs and protectors. There is little evidence that Europeans conceived of an Ottoman-Turkish engagement with antiquity and its material remains in any way comparable to their own. Few European writers knew or cared that there had existed in the Muslim world deep and lasting connections with ancient Greek culture, above all philosophy, geography, and science. So I would like to counter this European stereotype with an example of Ottoman engagement with the Tower of the Winds, which we only saw through a street yesterday we went on a tour, but we caught a glimpse, those who looked. So the engagement with the Tower of the Winds, I want to talk about the Tower of the Winds, but also I want to give two examples that were possible examples of the sort of artistic interplay we've been discussing, or what Paolo Girardelli, in his review of Under Rustem's Ottoman Baroque, has called creative misunderstanding. We need to explore what Eldem has recently dubbed the culture of contemplation in the pre-19th century Ottoman world, a culture rooted in what Guru Necipoglu calls connective thinking, expressed in word and image, and that term is very, very important for my entire way of working. Let me see if I have another image. Why don't we move to this one? Constructed in the last quarter of the 2nd century BC, the Tower of the Winds is mentioned by only two ancient authors. Varro treats it as a well-known device for indicating wind direction, while Vitruvius mentions 8 sculpted images of the 8 winds, each one, he says, facing its own wind, and at the tower's apex, a bronze triton holding out a rod, he says, in his right hand. Historians of science, archaeologists, architectural historians, see the building as a simulation of cosmic order and a theatrical display of Hellenistic scientific advances. Included in its panoply of wonders were 9 sundials, a water clock, and what has been plausibly reconstructed as an astrolabic mechanism with a bronze disc inscribed with the constellations. In the most comprehensive study to date, architectural historian Hermann Kienast argued that the domed ceiling was painted blue with gold stars, under which stood an astronomical instrument in the form of a celestial globe. By 1667, when our first Ottoman viewer Evliya Çelebi visited, the tower was just a shell. Evliya likens it, however, to the lighthouse of Alexandria, a homology that did not occur to any European. Modern scholars, however, deem the Pharos, with its octagonal middle tier, and the bronze statue of Zeus Sotir on the top, as the likely inspiration for the Athenian octagon. So by what intuition did Evliya make this connection? The Pharos served as a lighthouse only until the late 13th century, but its reputation lived on in Islamic literature and art. With strong echoes of earlier sources, the 10th century geographer Masoudi described its copper statues, One pointed, one sounded the hour, and one roared to warn of approaching enemies. He also noted the mirror that tracked movement at sea. This talismanic mirror of Alexander, which we heard about yesterday, featured in Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman books of wonders, the Ajaib, often together with striking images of the zodiac and even the winds. Here's a late 16th century Ottoman, so keep this one in mind, and then this is an Ottoman rendering based on that amazing Kitab Balhan I showed you before. This is the amazing book of Felicity. So, let's turn the page. This probably, take it in. I'm moving around too much.
I don't know.
Is that too loud there?
No, it's not too loud.
No. Okay. You're all deaf. Okay. Okay, but the pictures are nice. This probably late 17th century copy of Mustafa Ali's Universal History features the Pharos as the focal point on a world map, captioned, "This is the looking glass that surveys the entire world." The story goes that Alexander consulted Greek sages in order to invent an instrument inspired by an astrolabe that could reveal the entire world, including threatening pirates, as depicted here in a 17th century marvelous painting of, again, the octagonal Pharos. So in his description of the Tower of the Winds, Evliya describes, quote, the slanting lines of celestial declination carved into the marble, which, to Evliya's associative mind, are nothing less, he says, than traces of the astrolabic timepiece of the Greek sages. The empty stylus at this tower's apex is, of course, where the mirror once stood, according to Evliya. But Evliya is not a lone fantasist. Mahmud Effendi, our second Ottoman viewer, makes the same identification of the Tower of the Winds with the Pharos, which suggests that the connection must have seemed obvious to an Ottoman Muslim viewer. But I want to look more closely at how Mahmud built up his Pharos association. It may be a rare example of artistic interplay, quite different from the artistic exchange that we've been discussing. But he does it through updating and substitution. Mahmud Effendi must have been a boy when Evliya visited Athens. This native Muslim cleric was the first local inhabitant to write a history of his city under Ottoman rule, predating the better-known Ioannis Venizelos, whose family's house we visited yesterday, but he was predating him for about a century. With a family network in Athens, Chalkis, and Thebes, Mahmud studied in Istanbul and returned as the Mufti and Muderris of Athens in 1698 or 9. I imagine him issuing fatwas, actually something he complains about, but also preaching and teaching in the Athens area. He also wrote a 291-folio history of Athens from its mythical origins to his own day, calling it the History of the Sages, the City of Sages, the name by which Athens was known in the Muslim world. Mahmud states that he was inspired to relate the city's story by the ancient buildings and the name City of Sages, and he was encouraged to write by Plato-like and Aristotle-like men in Istanbul. Probably another motivation was to offer educated Ottomans the sort of information Europeans were starting to provide in books. Mahmud had more to work with than Evliya, as he was aware of Greek and Latin, as well as Frankish sources, thanks to the collaboration with two local Christian clerics. In keeping with his aim to explain the role of the sages, Mahmud's tower is an embodiment of wisdom's part in Athenian history. Mahmud says it was designed by Socrates the Wise, who, quote, invented and constructed an observatory that would house the knowledge of compass use for the benefit of shipping. So we see here Mahmud rationalizing and updating the Pharos tradition to resonate with his educated early 18th century audience. Instead of a talismanic mirror reflecting the movement of pirates, Mahmud introduces the modern science of the navigational compass. He calls the entire octagonal structure a compass, using pusula, the term borrowed from French boussole. And he explains that this compass was sited on a plot of land where all the winds converge. So while he loses the celebrated Alexandrian mirror, Mahmud holds on to the Alexandrian link by making the city the Athenians' primary seafaring trade destination. Now, in response to the questions we've been discussing about artists' and craftsmen's adaptations of visual idioms, we might compare Mahmud's adaptation of ancient sources for his contemporary readership. Mahmud's style isn't necessarily to quote ancient or Frankish sources, but to rework them into his own narrative, very much like the way we've been discussing the images, the decorative motifs. So while the entire octagon becomes a compass, the mirror is transformed into a weather vane in the form of a stork. In this transformation, we may discern the shadow of Mahmud's clerical collaborators who translated or more likely paraphrased ancient sources, in this case, I think obviously Vitruvius. Mahmud writes that, quote, the statue of a large stork was placed on top of the dome of the compass so that whatever direction the wind blew, the stork statue turned in that direction and the stork's beak showed the point of each wind on the compass. So the echo of Vitruvius's triton and rod is audible, but a stork? Perhaps Mahmud's Christian colleagues despaired of explaining what a triton was, and so they substituted the familiar Athenian stork. Or possibly, and I think that Mahmud chose the stork as a connection with his learned Constantinopolitan readership, because they would know about the stork talisman that had been placed on an ancient column by Hippocrates the Wise to ward off storks from Constantinople, as noted by Evliya Çelebi in the first book of the Seyahatname. So Mahmud moves easily between past and present, noting that the tower survives, but no one understands the theory and practice behind the compass, so it remains disused. Likewise, Evliya had reported the loss of the talismanic mirror. But the tower was soon to be brought into use again, and our third writer, like his two Ottoman predecessors, he refers to the building as a tent, çadır, not as Plato's tent, as Evliya had it, or Socrates' tent, as Mahmud, but as the tekke tent, because of its current use as a lodge. Did I go forward? A generation after Mahmud Efendi comes this third description. This is by the madrasa-educated career diplomat Mehmet Hashim, who visited Athens in 1797. His work, The Customs of Ottoman Lands, was first edited in 2022. So it's another reason why I haven't finished my book yet. New sources keep appearing. And it devotes 5 folios to Athens, noting its old name was the said city of the ancient sages. It's short but dense with intriguing new information, a reporter-like description of what he picked up on site. Mehmet once more explains that the winds used at sea by sailors is divided into 8, but that is as close as we get to the Pharos. Instead, he conveys some local interpretations of the sculpture's meaning while casting the workmanship in the familiar wonder language of the Ajaib tradition. An adapted version of Mehmet's text includes our unique Ottoman drawing of the tower. A legend in red ink runs above the sketch, identifying it as the dome tekke from the time of the sages of the aforementioned city. The depiction is decontextualized and highly abstracted. Instead of depicting the personifications, the draftsman provides a tantalizingly dry note indicating the location of the images. So that's the text that you see where you would have seen the carved images. The long description of the tent teke that we find in the full version of Mehmet Hashim's work does not appear here. But in that full text, after describing the building's appearance, Mehmet drops his more traditional ajaib framing and shifts to the present condition. If the octagonal tent has lost its earlier association with Plato and Socrates, it has gained dervishes and Sheikh Ahmed Baba. The building has been handed over to the Halveti order by sultanic grant, an extraordinary detail that corrects the long misunderstanding of the tekke as a mevleve tekke. And there is more. Mehmet Hashim treats us to a rare Muslim depiction of local Muslim response to European interest in Athenian architecture. He relates a dialogue between an English aristocrat and the sheikh that corresponds very closely to what James Stewart describes in and Nicholas Revet about their excavation in the Tower of the Winds in 1751. Mehmet says that the Englishman requests permission to dig under the wooden floor because he believes he will find a source of good quality water. The word Mehmet uses is ayazma, a holy spring from the Greek ayazma. The Englishman's only condition is that he be given 1 cubit long inscribed stone lying near the ayazma. The sheikh and his dervishes accept, the holy spring is discovered, a new wooden floor is built, and the Englishman gets his inscription. So this report largely confirms Stowen's own account, but Mehmet's use of ayazma neatly exemplifies cultural translation as a vital part of interpreting antiquities. But was it Stewart's idea to call the water source an ayazma to get the sheikh to let him excavate? Or was it his fixer's idea? Or was it in the process of remembering the story that Mehmet's local sources introduced the ayazma as they elaborated the Englishman's request? Mehmet Hashim's account gives us a rare, very rare, near intersection of what seems to have been largely distinct worlds of interpreting ancient buildings. Mehmet records attending a zikr in the tower and that he uttered Amin when at the end of the ceremony they prayed for the Sultan. He describes the instruments played as well as the deep spiritual concentration that prevailed over the participants as the instruments were gathered up afterwards. Mehmet visited Athens only a few years before Dodwell and other visitors who described the dervishes and made known across Europe the building's conversion into a mosque. Some early 19th century visitors seem to imply that the ceremony at the Dervish Tekke had even become a performance, a touristic money-spinning ploy with a special balcony for foreigners to watch the show. To conclude, Europeans hardly imagined an Ottoman-Turkish engagement with Greek antiquity in any way commensurate with their own. Until the late 18th century, what we have, I think, are largely parallel engagements with the ancient buildings of Athens, practically speaking a non-meeting of minds. Evliya's and Mahmud's interpretations of Athens embody an Ottoman culture of contemplation that was not calqued on Western modes, but should be understood in its own highly educated context. Mehmet Hashim's description retains elements from this earlier mytho-historic mode, while having something in common with what European visitors were also reporting. Overall, though, it's striking how little overlap we find between Ottoman and European descriptions of Athens. It is as if they and their informants operated in parallel universes. Or at least, it is how both sides seems to have preferred to represent their encounter with Athens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this very much needed, I think, non-Eurocentric view of the antiquities of Athens especially, and I'm sure that we're going to have a very fruitful discussion on the descriptions you mentioned in your paper afterwards. But now it's the time to listen to our second speaker, Paolo Girardelli. He completed his PhD at the University of Naples. His work focuses on European, Levantine, and non-Muslim presence in the plural, cosmopolitan, urban environments of the Eastern Mediterranean in the late Ottoman period. Paolo's publications are a lot. He has contributed also significantly to the development of a graduate program in art and architectural history and visual culture at Boğaziçi University, where he teaches, also as a member of ICOMOS, Italian chapter, and expert member of PRERICO, International Committee on Places of Religion and Ritual. Paolo has worked on the assessment of sites for UNESCO World Heritage designation. He co-edited the book Italian Architects and Builders in the Ottoman Empire and Modern Turkey, and for his contribution to the cultural dialogue between Italy and Turkey, he was honored with the Order of the Star of Italy in 2016. Paolo, the floor is yours. He is going to talk to us for a rotunda on the Aegean shores, the Franciscan Church of Santa Maria in Bornova.
So thank you very much to the organizers of this wonderful symposium, and I'm really happy to be here. It was a kind of initiation for me to the Gennadios, and I regret that it happened so late. I mean, but hopefully it's never too late. So I was really happy to be here. And I'm going to talk about something which is more like a work in progress. So many ideas and materials are just presented for comments, and so I hope to receive some kind of feedback. This is the building I'm focusing on today. It is still in its basically 1831 layout, although some decorative elements were added later. But it is a church managed by the Franciscan, by the Reformed observant well, there are several Zoccolanti, or several names of this branch of the Franciscans, who were mostly under Habsburg protection in the Ottoman Empire, which is interesting because it's usually French. The French ambassador is the main protagonist, but the Austrians are also gaining space after 1700. These are churches in Istanbul and in Izmir, also staffed by the same Franciscans. They are not round as you see. It's a rather unique shape, this church, that I would like to comment today on. The town of Bornova is very close to in the bay of Izmir. This is a French Michaud and Pujola were there just maybe before the beginning of the construction of this church, and they noted that it was beginning to be fashionable as a resort place, which is the main reason for the actual enlargement of this church. There was already a small wooden chapel, and then they decided to. And here, something I found here at the Gennadios, so the location of Bornova in relation to Smyrna. So you see how small it is comparable to the about 4,000, 5,000 inhabitants, doubling in summer. Summer means the months from March to November, so it's half of the year practically. And it's not only for vacation, because we will see that this church caters to a community that is rooted also. So let's look at, I will comment briefly on these formal features that are also rather interesting, but the dedication speaks about a certain Isidoro from Boscomare, Isidorus of Boscomare, which is in Liguria near the French border. He's the main actor behind this achievement, which is quite remarkable. He wanted this church to be rather dignified and outstanding. And he manages to, so here we see, so he managed in 1831 to have this temple in the honor of the Virgin Mary, etc., erected from scratch, from the foundation. Now, in any Italian or Catholic country, this detail, a fundamentis, would not be very special, but here it is a rather bold statement. Why? Because, as we know from many other sources, it was legally and theoretically, in principle, impossible to build a church from scratch in the Ottoman Islamic lands. So, in Islamic, this is very interestingly argued by Hillereau later in the Hillereau he had been in Izmir, by the way, in years very close to the construction of this church. But then Hillereau, the archbishop or apostolic vicar, decides to build a new cathedral for Istanbul, and he argues, he has all sorts of examples, problems. He doesn't want to make a Raya church. What does a Raya church means? The post-Byzantine churches that we have so far discussed. Raya church, the practice followed by the millet, by the non-Muslims who are Ottoman subjects, and he's very keen in distinguishing himself from them. They create a sort of de facto existence of a chapel, which is informal, unofficial, and then finally, through the aid of witnesses that are usually encouraged with gifts. We don't call this bribing, actually, in this way. I wouldn't. It's a complex question, but gifts, were part of interstate relations. But anyway, finally, you officialize a building as a church, and then you may have also permission to rebuild it, and you pretend that you're going to rebuild it in the same shape, but you actually enlarge it significantly. This is what Hillereau obtained at Constantinople, and his main obsession was really to impress the other Christians, to impress the Orthodox, the Armenian, with a Catholic cathedral that is different. There was something similar, I would say, in Izmir, in Bornova. Now, what Bishop Hillel was arguing in regard to the possibility and legal standing of a new Raya church is probably what happened in the case of Santa Maria during the 18th century. So we have evidence that an informal chapel, wooden chapel, existed. It was destroyed by fire in 1797. Then the reconstruction leads to its recognition as a parish church, which is quite an important step, because it's not easy to create. It's a matter of resources, responsibilities, so the church becomes responsible for a community that it's actually rooted. It's not only vacationers. There must be some. The small chapel serves a parish for a local community of limited size, but in the period from March to November, the Catholic flock doubles or triples. This is the main reason behind Bosco Mare's efforts to rebuild Santa Maria in a larger, more stately layout. All the inhabitants agree, but the church should be remade in the same shape. If and when an old church is found in a state of impending ruin, this supreme mufti answered that those to whom it belongs can repair it in its pristine state without operating the slightest enlargement. This is underlined. And then the firman is obtained, which states exactly the same thing, so it can be rebuilt, but in the same size, in the same shape. But now Isidoro, who is a very ambitious and interesting figure, I would like to discover more about this individual. So in May we started the construction. The firman stated that the new church should be exactly as high and as long and wide as the old, but if this is done, then there is no meaning in remaking it, because it's already too small, and so there is no meaning in it. So in order to make it larger, we gave a good gift, etc. That is recorded in the accounting book of the expenses, etc. So in the end, we have a church with a new design, spheric and spherical, a cupola. Spherical here means round, probably, not with a dome, and here the dome is interesting. But this is the laying of the first stone on May 14, 1831. Isidoro da Boscomare wears a piviale. We have seen many textiles. This is not from but it's just an example of an Italian piviale. There are several examples like this in the sacristies of Catholic churches. So this is another point that could be investigated, how much Italian textile culture came to the Ottoman Catholic communities. A report mentioned a community of 500 parishioners of diverse nationality for this church in Bornova, and then you have marriages, baptism, children of unknown parents, funerals, etc. A school with 15 boys teaching in Italian and in Greek. The bigger Santa Maria della Concezione in Smyrna had 12,000 Catholics and administered this many marriages, baptism, etc. Around 1850, to keep in mind, Smyrna had approximately 150,000 inhabitants. 2/3 of them were Greeks, and many of these Greeks were probably Catholics. So this is the note with these figures. Now, the interesting thing, this achievement of building a church like this is the outcome of the increasing power and confidence gained by the Catholics during the final decades of Mahmud II's rule. Santa Maria is built in the same period of the recognition of the new Ottoman millet of the Armenian Catholics. In 1832, Mahmud II also has to recognize the independence of Greece. Permissions to restore, in quote, because it's not restoring, it's really remaking in much more stately layouts of every denomination abound, especially in the years 1831, 38. Correspondence in Propaganda Fide mentions the builder or Kalfa entrusted the project, a certain Giorgio Aperis from Tinos. I beg you to inform me if you find anything about someone with this name from Tinos. Considered one of the most skilled Kalfas of the time. So he comes from Tinos and he proposes a design that Isidoro doesn't want. He's not satisfied with the design initially proposed by Aperi, who meant to cover the church with 2 domes of different sizes, probably a large one on the prayer hall and a smaller one for the chancel. We don't have a drawing, we don't have just... we can guess. Now, Isidoro objects that it is not becoming for a church such an oddity as a mother and a daughter dome. He advocates instead a single large dome covering the round building as in the Rotonda in Rome. And this is the most ambitious part of the story, because he mentioned that what he really wants is a church that looks like the Pantheon. Of course, it's really out of proportion. The Pantheon was a church, but it had inspired all sorts of buildings. So the Church of Santa, and I think now coming to the conclusion, the Church of Santa Maria in Bonova should not be compared to the Pantheon in the same way as Palladio's Villa Capra, and is substantially distant from the endless reworkings of this model enacted by Soufflot, Jefferson, Bianchi in Naples, Canova and others in Possagno, and many others. So it's a very different thing. I think the main point in Isidoro da Boscomare's commitment was, as it would be later for Hillereau, the bishop we read, to achieve something as yet unattempted by Christians living under Ottoman rule, to locate architecturally this rather extravagant church in a meaningful context. We may rather explore the manifold reception, reworkings, and creative misunderstandings, as Elizabeth was mentioning, of classical and Baroque idioms in Izmir and in the Greek islands under Venetian and Ottoman rule. And we have had such a rich exposure yesterday and today to all these mechanisms, circulation, borrowings, and it's really that area that may give sense to the fact that the builder of this rotunda was a Levantine from Tinos, and Levantine is another term like Post-Byzantine or Ottoman that should be always contextualized, may suggest comparisons with Catholic sanctuaries and Catholic material architectural culture in this and other islands with a strong Catholic presence. In Tinos, I recently found out there is this quite outstanding classicizing monument in the Capuchin monastery of St. Anthony. It's older, as far as I understand. There's very little scholarship on it. It's older than, and so I don't think the architect is the same for that. But the architect is from Tinos, and Tinos had this kind of tradition. The entablature, in particular, I think may be loosely compared. This interesting zigzag decoration is instead comparable to a Gothic, the Mediterranean vein of Gothic that was especially, or Norman origin, but especially present in Sicily. This is Agrigento. So we have a juncture of a confluence of different source Mediterranean elements in this design. Since the end of, this is my conclusion, since the end of the 18th century, the gradual acquisition of properties with Ottoman namesakes of diverse background, remember, it was theoretically forbidden to own property until 1869 in the Ottoman Empire. But there were so many ways of circumventing this obstacle with namesakes. It's necessary, so these acquisitions necessary to enlarge the site of the Franciscans in Bornova and finally to build their rotunda in 1831 shows that more than in Pera or in the Rue de Franc in Izmir, here this Catholic microcosm was surrounded and interacting with Muslim, Greek Orthodox and Armenian properties and neighbors. And for each of these acquisitions, there is a complex negotiation which is transcultural, multicultural. Documents in Armenian, Franco-Chiotica, the teaching in Italian, French and Greek, the knowledge of Turkish and Arabic was rather common in these sites and around this church. So adopting, however naively or inconsistent, the symbolic archetypal round shape of a temple dedicated in Roman antiquity to all deities and later to the Virgin Mary and the Martyrs by Pope Boniface IV in the early 7th century, may be in keeping not with Roman imperial universalism revived in academic ways in the examples I showed before, but with the pragmatic vernacular cosmopolitanism that many Levantines, clerical and secular, were practicing in lands like Bornova, Izmir, and in the Ottoman Aegean. Being Catholic, being Roman, being different, but speaking to all, that this should be the point. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Be careful for this fascinating example document you showed us, showing both that how the law, the Ottoman law, was wanting certain features from all the non-Muslims, and at the same time how the different communities circumvented the law, but also that all these monuments, we were speaking about identities in our historiographical approach in these issues, but the monument, the buildings themselves, they were embodied also with identities, like the ones you showed. The Greeks, they built the bell tower of Hagia Fotini in Smyrni, the highest building in Smyrni, in 1856.
Yeah,
the exact day
Islahat
of
Islahat Ferman. No, that's. But this is earlier, so that's
again by Etiniot.
That's in
Xenophon Latris was from Tinos.
The name, okay.
Yeah,
so all these names should be.
And the one who said Georgios Apergis, we will certainly locate him somewhere.
Okay, that's very.
But the floor is now open for discussion, and I urge you to help us. Nobody? Yes, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for both presentations. A question for the first one. I was wondering whether in this dialogue, or actually non-dialogue, between Ottoman and Western European perceptions of Athens, the city of Athens and its ancient architecture, whether in these constellations there are also any Greek-speaking positions, because Venizelos is not really talking about the monuments. Is there anything else? And something minor, in the very first miniature that you showed us of the Pharos, was there, on top of the Pharos, there was, if I understood well, a mirror? And next to the mirror, was there a face of a woman that was really given in a representational way? I mean, very different from, in a style that's very different from the rest of the image. Just a specification on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for those questions. And your first one, it's what we'd all love to know. To me, one of the... okay, sorry, I'm actually not very well, so I'm not projecting. So this is one of the things we would love to know, is what local people were interpreting, how they were reading it. What we have are little snatches from what Europeans report, and also our Ottoman reports say the locals call these. We basically have a few names of what people, some ancient names they associate with buildings. But that's it's very frustrating. I mean, it's another reason I keep waiting for pulling out, spending more time on this project, hoping that maybe something will appear. And this extraordinary new Ottoman description has appeared. But as you say, Venizelos isn't interested, and it's very hard to get local views. Yeah, this is part of the growing sense that and this topic has come up again the past few days, that the language we use for antiquities, this is we're in danger always of projecting a Western view, and that I think is very strong in how we try to tease out any local Greek or local Turkish. I mean, that's why Mahmud Effendi is amazing, because he's a local Turkish view. But yeah, the short answer is, yeah, we don't really have, I'm waiting. I mean, there are, even the few sources we have from earlier, like this one called the Theatres and Schools, there have been questions of whether maybe this wasn't even a Greek local, it's all this very mixed. Maybe it was really an Italian imported notions of it. Anyway, we'll keep working on it. And as for the figure on the Pharos, yeah, there is a female figure, but I haven't actually explored what that. I mean, I don't know. I really haven't explored it. Maybe there's someone else who would have a go at interpreting it. Thanks. So, Nico,
maybe a quick follow-up. Go ahead, Ilia. Quick follow-up question to Elizabeth. Thank you for this wonderful paper. You began by saying basically that Western antiquarians scoff at local, or sort of don't see any local interpretations, any local uses of the antiquities. You then go on to show us, as you clarify, local Muslim elite reception of the antiquities. What did these local Muslim or Christian elites make of popular practices of devotion and veneration that had to do with the antiquities? Would your protagonists scoff at a group of Christians venerating a column at the church of Ayanis di Golona, a sort of next neighborhood? Or would they accept that somehow as legitimate, or as...
So the educators, so Avlia, my educated sources, they tend to weave them in. They tend to weave them in a less judgmental way. But the very interesting thing with Bat Evlia, and I have to say, I'm sorry, because I'm a bit under the weather, I forgot to say that Elias and I are working on this project together. He's the great Evlia enthusiast, I am too. But so Evlia, and Elias may want to add to this, but it's very interesting how almost invisible the Christians of Athens are in his account, but he does actually mention a few places where he can scoff at the Christian legends. One is in the Parthenon. He says, the Christians think there's some sort of magical lamp in there. We know it's not. So he does scoff at the Christians, though. We don't hear him scoffing at Muslims. And then he also scoffs at this idea that there was some sort of tomb of Philip inside the Pharos, inside the the Tower of the Winds. So that scoffing does come, but it's carefully targeted. But it's an interesting question to tease out. Thanks.
Garth? Yeah, please. And then Denise.
Two totally off-the-wall comments, or rather off the screen. For Girardelli first, your last screen, a lot of what you said on your last screen, especially about universalization and the many cultural currents mixing with each other in Anatolia, could equally well have been said about the Seljuks 800 years earlier. Seljuks. Second off-the-screen comment, it's sometimes, this is Key Fowden's first slide, it's sometimes good to have these slides projected this large, because you notice things that your eye has slid over before. And this is with reference, of course, to the interaction of the communities in Athens, which is always fascinating to me. Dodwell does actually show a Greek papas and a Capuchin monk sitting side by side, right slap in the middle of the picture, listening to the dervish, the Halveti dervish, doing his teaching.
Thank you. It's true. I mean, there is I think a long durée of cultural interactions and overlaps in Anatolia that is far older than this period. But in my work, I'm interested in locating this sort of foreign element, which is the Catholic. It was also not very foreign in the Middle Ages, I mean, and there is a memory of that. Now, there is also the idea that this ideological and mythical continuity of a medieval Latin presence that can be revived or reenacted with the capitulations, and so it's that political context that I'm trying to see how it surfaces in architecture. And thank you anyway.
So I have a working theory or impression, and it's, I don't know, is Nikolaos here today? Because it comes up in our on our tour yesterday too, that European depictions of the Greeks, of the locals, the mixed locals in Athens, say in Athens, but everywhere too, elsewhere, they like to present this idea of some sort of coexistence and the conversation and the dialogue, and you get the different types, almost like a costume album. I mean, I think that the Europeans wanted to see these figures together, partly because so they could put them all at the same level and make it clear that, you know, you Greeks are just like the Turks. You're all there. There's a sort of leveling and a distancing and exoticizing that. So I think Nikos knows I'm very hesitant to overinterpret or put much on European accounts of dialogue. What are they talking about? The Quran? I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe they're talking about the price of oil, much more likely. But we have to be very careful, I think, in reading much into these images, however nice it's interesting. Yeah, I'm very cautious about that. I haven't seen, that's why my conclusion is I think they are, in a sense, however much I started out wanting to see a sort of Muslim Greek interaction, I actually haven't got my hands on it yet.
Thank you. Denise, Turkey, please.
Thank you so much. Does it work? It works. Thank you so much for the two presentations. I have I've sort of comment questions for both, and I'm hoping to keep them short. One is for Paolo. When I ventured into the Saint-Esprit Cathedral in Istanbul many years ago in search of Sester, the head gardener of Yıldız. The priest then was very helpful in indicating some archives where we identified collectively that a priest was sent continually from Tinos over to Saint-Esprit to do some liturgical activities from 1840s on. And craftsmen also from Tinos arrived to build some chapels within that space. So Tinos appears to, and I think some sort of base of knowledge of, as a sort of a conduit between, between Rome and Izmir. And Aperi may appear for you in those archives if the same priest is there and is happily willing to share the information. But
yes, thank you. No, I think Tinos, because of its prominent Catholic character and somehow maybe replaces, I wouldn't say that much, but it replaces Chios maybe after Chios declines because of the 1822 catastrophe, and so maybe it's another place to look at and as you said, yes, also the tower of
Tinos was also the island of the marble and
of marble,
and
so
we have
materials.
Veronica Callas from our online.
I have a question.
And
Veronica will understand because she's a friend. Elizabeth, unless you want to do it.
No, just to say that for Tinos, and then I will give you again. I'm saying that Veronica Callas from our online participant suggests to Paolo and maybe to all of us to visit Tinos, the new Marble Museum, Museum Armarotechnias. They maybe have information about Giorgio Aperi.
Yes.
And then there is also a comment by Dimitris, our colleague Dimitris Kosoris, says that it would be interesting to compare with the reconstruction of St. George in Syros, the San Giorgio up in the hill, which took place in the same period on the initiative of Blanchis, who had been pastor of Santa Maria Draperis, a friend of the Austrian, before he went as an apostolic vicar and bishop to Syros after 1825. And Tiniot craftsmen were also involved in the reconstruction of San Giorgio in Syros. Okay. And
thank you so much for this suggestion.
Please, Denise, I apologize.
I hate hogging the microphone, but and I think Elizabeth and I will continue discussing. But with Mehmet Hashim, what was his date? And he was sent from Istanbul over to Athens. Is he an Istanbulite? Mehmet Hashim.
Yes, he passed through Athens in 1797.
Okay.
Yeah? And he traveled very, very widely. I mean, it's a very exciting text. We were just looking the other day. There's so much. I mean, we want everyone to start looking at it because he traveled very widely. There's a lot on Aleppo, Mardin, but he was Istanbul-based, and he traveled. Yeah, he traveled as a bureaucrat.
It's a very new publication by Feridun Emegen and Ilhan Shahin. It's a new travelogue, a late 18th century Evlia Çelebi. He travels Anatolia, Istanbul, the Balkans, and the Aegean Islands, and he has a huge chapter on Chios. So it is called Ima Itorehati Buldanan, published by Turk Tarikh Kurumu. It's a new publication.
Just, in terms of Ayazmaz, and Elias would know this, but there's 19th century Istanbul writers describing the topography and sites of Istanbul, Incicihan, Eremya Çelebi, and they really focus on Ayazmaz and the location of Ayazmaz across the Bosphorus, along the Bosphorus. And some of these structures, some of these churches are situated over the Ayazmaz. So I think there's a lot there that he's bringing from his experience of Istanbul, not to pull you back into the supposed center, but I think it might be worthwhile to look at these texts. And çadır as a term, I mean, the çadır kiosks appear around this time in the 18th century, with these particular tent-like hoods. And so he's, again, I think, carrying something he knows in Istanbul that he's seen across the new buildings from Ahmet III on into what he's seeing is happening there. So, but it's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's just one thing that doesn't matter. I didn't say anything. No, thanks. It's interesting that çadır is actually used by everyone, too. It's not just his new. I mean, that's interesting. But I think the ayasma, we will definitely look in the whole text. That's very helpful.
Well, if there are no other questions, I would like to ask Alper and Maria to take the floor for the closing remarks of this very successful symposium.
Thank you. First of all, I would really thank all the participants, speakers, moderators, audience. I mean, I have very rarely seen such a knowledgeable crowd all together, interacting so smoothly with each other. I really think this is something that we should highlight and underscore about this symposium. We are very happy about the success that this symposium had and the international interest this program has created. I have received a number of emails from around the globe, I would say, from many curators, scholars, students, researchers. I mean, it's great. Thank you for this big manifestation of interest and support. Something that we didn't underscore in the introduction is going to be a nice conclusion, I think. We used Balkan and Aegean on purpose because even though Aegeans are a part of the Balkans, but to underscore the double, let's say, the two different channels and itineraries through which the Western knowledge travels within the Ottoman world. One is really closely tied to Central Europe, to Habsburgs, through Siatista, etc., passing through Bulgaria, northern Greece, etc. And the other one is the Aegean, which brings us to Italy, to remote Italy, to provinces of Italy, and to France. One by land, one by sea. They have different patterns, they have different dynamics, but they all contribute to this confluence of ideas, skills, etc. And other part of the title, second half of the title, East and West. Well, now we see with Cairo, but putting also North and South should have would be so so strange in the title, but the horizons are widening in every direction, with textiles from Mughal and Persianate world, and ceilings from Cairo, and so on. In the organization of the sessions, we tried to give a vague idea of a sort of retrospectively advancing look towards. So first we start with tile stoves, etc., which are contemporary connections or books in the case of church decoration. Then we slowly get into a layer down with Byzantine heritage, and now we get a layer down with a vague or very precise idea of antiquity and the meeting or non-meeting of minds, which I absolutely find fascinating and share as standing towards the material, because when we start speaking about an Ottoman antiquarianism, everything starts to get so weird. I mean, we should highlight the contrasts and we should highlight the contradictions. I find this otherwise it is a too convincing narrative, and when a historiographical narrative is so convincing, because it is too flat usually, and it's too simplified, reductive, let's say. And I would use 3 adjectives to describe our whole experience in this symposium, and all of them happen to have the same prefix in English. Enriching, because this was so enriching for everyone. Enriching from different preparations, different backgrounds, and different points of interest, different provinces, different material. And the second adjective is encouraging, and this was really encouraging, and I should once again underscore the ease with people talk to each other during this conference. We approached each other, we contradicted each other with an extraordinary ease. Nobody's trying to monopolize the field. I really love this this happening, and here comes the third adjective, empowering, because only sharing knowledge empowers scholarship, and I think this will give us a nice start from now on. I really loved sharing this moment with you, and many of the speakers I met previously. Some are new friends, and I really enjoyed the conversation both throughout the sessions and after the sessions. If we were living in the 18th century, I would have invited you all to a thunder conversation at my place, because this intimate and easy relationship that we build both personally and intellectually is something that I find extraordinary and beautiful. Thank you for your participation. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.
I just wanted to echo what Alper said. I mean, to really thank all the speakers for really wonderfully crafted papers that opened up new questions and ideas and new material. I mean, sharing new material is very important. We never meant to say that, I didn't mean to say that we are the first forum that explores identities and multiple identities in this period. Very far from it. But it was a symposium focused on objects, on monuments, on art history and architectural history. And we all know, I mean, those of us who are who work in this field, that there are specific issues that we have to deal with. So it's, we need to work with historians and through interdisciplinary ways in order to come to new interpretations and to understand and appreciate things. But to me, it has been very important, the new material, as I just said, also the chance to be among colleagues, I mean, to have sort of 12, 15 people who look at this material with sort of similar perspectives and very different perspectives, and stand in front of this material. I mean, yesterday we visited Ottoman Athens. Today we will visit, a very small group of us, the Benaki Museum. We visited the Staphatos room yesterday at the Dimitris Library, just to have this very tightly knit group of people who are thinking about the same issues from different perspectives can really be enriching, empowering, and encouraging. Okay, great. And what I said yesterday, having scholars, researchers, but also who teach in the classroom with their own sets of issues of how to put together this material, and having also people who are in the field, who are faced with issues of funding, of what to save, because obviously you cannot save everything, and how to work through this. I think these collaborations, I hope, will go on, and I hope we will continue this dialogue. Lastly, because this is a seminar convened, by the Gennadios Library, libraries are very important. We managed to have a very fruitful and friendly conversation, workshop-y conversation in this big auditorium. But obviously, it's a library that brings us together. We spend our lives in libraries, some of us longer than others. But it's my hope that, first of all, there will be some publication coming out of this symposium, and that this is an opening and an expansion of a group that obviously we need to include more people, and we need, as I urged the younger people among our group, go out, get funding for projects that actually what they will do is demarginalize, if this is a word, this part of the world, and really put it into a context that where more people will talk more about this material. So thank you very much to the speakers, to the moderators, to all of you, to our audience. Thank you.